Into that, and I think we can sort of formally kick off the interview here.
Great.
I've been chatting here with Doug Zell, who, among many other things, is one of the founders of the Meteor, and we'll talk about the other businesses as well. But Doug, welcome to the Hill Climber Show. Thank you for spending some of your time. I know you're really busy right now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's nice to be inside of a cool studio here at the end of a scorching summer.
Yeah, and we're in Just Push Record Studios here in North Austin, and our friend Corey has pumped on the AC for us, so we're very appreciative. Doug, I feel like we have a lot to discuss. Your life has really kind of I feel like straddled exactly what we like talking about in the show, which is bikes and business. I guess just to kind of kick things off, best question to start with is how'd you start riding bikes? How'd you get into it?
So I raced as a kid. I grew up in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Which actually at the time, in the mid to late 80s, the American riding scene was pretty strong. It was like the Le Mans era, the Haydns, speed skating, them racing in the Olympics, etc. If I'm getting that right, I think.
So if we're comparing the Le Mans era to the Lance era,
right? How
does that stack up?
It was a really fun time. I mean, I think that particularly
cool.
in the upper Midwest, because a lot of the kids that speed skated would ride bikes in the summer for training. Okay. So that was very common. It was very accepted. And then, the cold states also have a long history of like endurance sports, whether it's cross country ski racing, and whatever fall sports like cross country. It's very big in that, or was very big in that part of the world. And there's a series now that's become Tour of America's Dairyland that back then was called Super Week. So that was like at my front doorstep as a kid. So I started bicycle touring with my friends, I would say in my mid-teens, and I think my parents were.
And this was like the 80s. This was
yeah. I mean I raced. I think. What would be 80, like 80 to 84 kind of thing in high school. I graduated from college in 88, but I stopped racing when I went to college, essentially. So,
and you're one of the few folks that I strike up conversation and ask people how they got into riding all the time, and it's pretty rare for Americans to be riding bikes and racing bikes that early. So I'm always really tickled and fascinated by it.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really fun time. We were discussing this before we got to this interview, if you will. It was a great era where juniors racing was like blowing up, and I'd roll to the races with some of the better seniors racers, whatever category 1 racers, and race all over the Midwest. And it was really a great way to see like that part of the country, meet other people. Went to the Olympic Training Center. My roommate was Frankie Andreo, so it's like we went different directions in racing, but it was a really wonderful time, and it was a sport that I adored it, and then there wasn't really much of a collegiate scene developed at all,
right?
And I think if there had been, I might have dipped into that, but it was. I raced for, I want to say 3 or 4 years, raced a little bit in New Zealand, graduated from high school early to go do that.
And raced in New Zealand, meaning went to New Zealand to race?
Yeah, well, I graduated a semester early, and, winter in the upper Midwest is not wonderful. So I was in Auckland, in and around Auckland, and rode and raced around there, which was super cool. As a 17-year-old becoming an 18-year-old.
How'd you end up there? I mean, how'd that?
Well,
happen?
Because I think that my concern was that do they speak English?
Yeah.
So that was part of it. It also has an interesting, pretty successful racing tradition for being such a small country, 4 million people. Great geography to race.
Did you have a relate? Did you have a friend from New Zealand?
I actually had a buddy who went as an exchange student. I want to say junior year in high school. Played rugby. Said he loved it. Contacted like the cycling association there. Found someone to that I could go live with.
Right.
And who was on their national team and had a younger brother. So it was really wonderful. I mean, it was just super cool. see the world, and again, spoke English. Just had to ride on the other side of the road.
Totally.
But it was, I loved every minute of it.
All right.
And I loved all of my early cycling experiences, and actually, have been racing as a masters racer. And it's funny that there's actually a kid, I love that. As I'm 57, there's a guy on my team now that I raced with when I was in my teens.
Okay.
And I ran into him on the trail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was like, Nelson, is that you? And he's like, Doug Zell. And we raced against each other as kids. He was always a little bit better than me, and still is. Mm-hmm. But he's now the associate dean of the MIT Business School. So, smart guy, but just an interesting guy. So,
yeah.
So it's to reunite with folks like that, and masters racing now has become really lovely too. And that, you get into your 50s and no one wants to really hurt each other, put each other into the curb, all that stuff. So the conversations you have and the community that exists is really compelling.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just interesting folks.
Yeah.
And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of clever people, a lot of people that may have gone into coaching. It seems like those,
Right.
So those are the folks that are racing now. So I raced when I was younger, and then I want to say I took a 29-year break.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, so I took a bunch of time off.
Did you burn out, or it was more?
Yeah, I think it was just one of those things that there was a choice of trying to go on and race in Europe and go to college and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I said, let's go to college. So
you did the year in New Zealand, came back and went to.
I did winter. It was like 5 months in New Zealand, and then came back and decided I should just I'm pretty good. I'm probably not good enough to make a profession out of this. So went to college, forgot about it for a long time, and led a couple of lifetimes between then and now.
Yeah.
And got back on the bike and when I was 47.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll definitely come back to that. And there's a lot there that I did not know about. So, I'm definitely curious. You as a kid, you were really into cycling. Pursued the passion, and then you've done a few really interesting things as part of your career, outside of cycling. So I'm curious, what were you like as a kid? I mean, so much of what you've done in your career is sort of aesthetically driven with food and coffee, and literal design aesthetics. So what kind of kid were you?
I think I was very similar to what I am like now. Mm-hmm. I think that my parents were jewelry designers, so I don't want to say grew up.
Both of them were.
Yeah, they worked together. Had their own. Yeah. Had a small shop. I saw them go from, putting, beads on strings and feathers and all that stuff. Again, realized this was like late 70s, early 80s. So there's still sort of remnants.
I'm getting the picture. Is forming.
So if I can make it quick, my mother was a beautician, whatever, managed a beauty salon and then somehow owned it. And then my dad kind of did a bunch of different things and started making jewelry and showing it in her beauty salon. And then that kind of took off. And then they started doing art fairs, and I slept in the back of back behind their booth.
Wow.
And then it transformed from a business that was feathers and beads to diamonds and gold. So
they were entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So I saw that process, and I enjoyed it, and I would help help sell or whatever it was, right? So it was and from the Wisconsin State Fair to the Elkhorn County Fair. I mean, some of these where the people next to us were selling vacuum cleaners.
Right.
So watching that was cool.
Yeah.
So I think that they did their own thing, and to me, there was certainly design in that. I wish I could draw or paint or do sculpture or something like that, and I'd love to say that I can, but I'm not particularly good at it. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you what I think looks good.
Yeah.
So
which is very valuable.
Yeah. So I think that I think design was considered in the house that I was growing up, and I think that they went from from nothing to something, sort of before my eyes, and kind of in a period where I could see some of it and maybe understand some of it. I think you don't really understand what that trajectory looks like until much after it happens. You don't have the capacity to really understand.
So they grew their jewelry business, and did they end up owning a store and, and a brand?
They had a store, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and they did like custom design rings and stuff like that.
Got it.
So, that they built and sold whatever, and retired.
Got it.
So I saw all of that. I think that, I think that I didn't realize the importance of design and what I did and didn't know or consider till much later in life. I think that you don't. There's a point where it hits you how important design is.
Yeah.
And some people, it never hits them. They don't see it, and that's fine. It's not good. It's not bad. But I think that once you realize how important it is and how you feel about things when you walk into a place and those pieces are considered, you can't. Once you know it, it's hard to unknow it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's profound when you see things that you walk in and you're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And I think that became clearer to me in the process at Intelligentsia as we developed, what we wanted the brand to look like, and then what we wanted the cafes to look like. And I think it was really, a credit to when we opened our first cafe in Los Angeles and meeting some very talented architects and just worldview and the way other people saw that.
That's so interesting. So that, by the way, to catch everyone up, Doug was a co-founder of Intelligentsia, which is a very well-respected coffee brand that I think you started in the mid 90s, right, or
95, yeah.
And really it grew. I obviously not an overnight success, but it really grew meaningfully with incredible design aesthetics and obviously incredible coffee.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. No, 20 years to an overnight success, we like to say.
Right.
But that was, I think that when we got to the cafe in Silver Lake, that was when it occurred to me that how important design was, and what was considered, and
which was
materials. And 2007,
right? We opened. So I think that's really interesting because you built this brand that today to me means premium,
right,
premium design, premium coffee.
Yes. And
it wasn't until 12 years after you all started or so that that really hit you in the face as far as how important the entire aesthetic of the experience, the location, the design pieces.
I think that there was a bit of good fortune in all of the pieces coming together and the people you meet and the connections you make. And I think it was at that point that our sourcing and the barista craft and all of those things were. It was a bit of a lucky moment in time when they all came together in one place. And I think that's, and also frankly, it's when Los Angeles from a cultural standpoint and an artistic standpoint was also ascending.
Okay.
I would say it was it was when Los Angeles and like Brooklyn were taking off.
Got it.
So, and frankly, that part of town in Los Angeles, Silver Lake, Echo Park, Los Feliz, all of that was it was so cool. It was just really wonderful. And I think that it led me to believe as a kid from Milwaukee that, and part of the DNA of Los Angeles that's so impressive is just that creativity is like a birthright, like go for it. Right? Yeah. And everything's like, well, let's have a look. Yeah. And it's not like, I got to walk by it 200 times for us to consider it. Like, let's go check it out.
People are supportive,
right.
Really across the board in a way that East Coast, it's not like that.
It's different. It's very different. It's different. And I think that so I think that was lucky and really impacted how I considered things. Mm-hmm. And I also met some people there that were younger and doing some really clever stuff with design, and I was impressed with how confidently they were moving forward with it.
Cool.
They weren't like, I don't think this is going to work.
Right.
And it occurred to me that a big part of why what they did worked is they had conviction about it. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well,
Yeah.
It seems like a good idea.
Very, very cool.
Yeah. So I think that was when it occurred to me that having a point of view and really getting behind it was the right way to do things.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if it's too guided by trying to take in what everybody thinks, and that's a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
But I just don't know that you get to something that really
avant-garde or out front, or
you're following the curve.
Yeah.
You're not setting it. So there is some risk in doing things that are a bit more out there. But boy, it's so fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, my point from earlier about Intelligentsia was you can really tell that you had fun and you had conviction, and,
yes.
and it sounds like you had a great team that
yeah.
all
I mean, and I think that the coffee, you know, it was the work at Source with producers that wanted to come along.
So sorry to cut you off. Can we take one step back, and
Mm-hmm.
can you give us the kind of, you know, hard to sum it up, but give us the kind of origin story for
Sure.
Intelligentsia? Yeah.
For Intelligentsia, for the way we source coffee, or for which part? The whole thing?
Oh man, yeah. I guess the whole thing. If you could just let the listeners kind of know a little bit more
Sure.
About the brand.
I think that you know, it started humbly as a cafe that roasted its own coffee in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
There was, you know, I worked for a couple of roasters.
Which was uncommon.
Yes,
right?
it was uncommon.
Yeah.
It was uncommon, which now sounds like
Crazy
like
town.
silly,
Yeah.
right? It's sort of, you know, it's like saying, you know, then there's like a couple of craft brewers, which at the time was
Right.
also true.
Right.
So the idea of a little roaster inside of a coffee bar was not typically considered. It was so strange. I still remember like the city of Chicago trying to figure out like what's the permit like, who do we bring in to approve
Mm-hmm.
this, etc. So, you know, at that point it was just freshly roasted coffee, and we knew very little. You know, you'd have the importer send coffee and you'd taste it or you wouldn't, or whatever, you know, and say that's good. We didn't know much about the seasonality of the green coffee. We didn't know much about what the supply chain looked like, really. You know,
Yeah.
we just wanted to roast coffee, and then frankly in 1995, 1996, the barista craft thing was not yet a thing either.
Yeah.
It was, you know, it was lots of milk and etc. So
Right.
sloshing it in after the darkly roasted espresso. So
Isn't it crazy that we can barely remember the time when that was the case, where, you know, there wasn't like
well, right, and again,
intricate
and
coffee being offered everywhere.
Evidence that if something, yeah, that a small idea can spread far and wide if it's well conceived.
Yeah.
Is not something I would have thought if you asked me in 1995.
Yeah.
And now I would say, yeah, that's the thing.
Right.
And then if you can take it and you can endure the hard part of getting it started and having enough and convincing enough people to believe in it,
Yeah.
then it can really be something.
Yeah.
But I think it's that ability to endure at the beginning that is very hard for people to do.
Yeah, and it's not the overnight success, right? It's
not. And it doesn't take 18 months. It doesn't
Right.
take, it takes, you know, and I tell this to other people, it takes at least 5 years.
Yeah.
At least 5 years.
Yeah.
So expect it to like be really hard for 5 years. Really hard. Like so hard that you're wondering most of the time why you did it.
Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes something, and then it makes sense why you did it. But
Right. The
before that,
trough
yeah,
of
but
despair.
but before that, you're like, oh my God, I should have just stuck with what everyone else is doing.
Right.
So anyway, so then we began to dig into the sourcing piece, and I remember there was a moment, you know, we had traveled with an importer to Mexico and another one to Costa Rica, and there was a point where we realized that, oh gosh, the people that are growing the coffee really aren't getting any feedback from the roaster about what they think about the coffee. It was as if you were, you know, there's
no feedback.
There was a cook back there, and
Yeah.
he's just putting, or you know, whatever. She was putting food through a window,
Yeah.
and no one ever said if it was good or not.
Right.
They're just like more food, and then the price of that was controlled externally,
Yeah.
and the person making the food would have no control over what they get paid,
Yeah.
regardless of the quality. I mean, so that was coffee. It was like sold from the producer into a black hole that they didn't know what the quality was like, or it was they were not being rewarded for it.
Right.
So
So the point you're making is that they could be making incredible premium, growing incredible premium beans, or growing beans that were nothing to write home about, and they would be paid the same, and there was no way to compensate them.
I mean, I think there were some
stuff.
people that realized the quality, and they also had, geographic advantages of altitude and infrastructure. If the country had put together programs where there were good, mills and feedback in that regard. But it was not particularly widespread. So that was, there were a few aha moments there where we said, oh gosh, let's see if we can work directly with these people. And then there was the whole challenge of like, well, there's these importers and they serve a purpose and they serve financing and they can, carry the, but then we figured out a way to go through the bank, and there was a guy who kind of gave me a break with a building and some other stuff. That's like, well, why don't you just import it yourselves? And we were like, what? How would we do that? And then not realizing that global shipping had been figured out, 50 years ago. And he was an importer of stuff that like Crate and Barrel sold from China and India. And he's like, it's not hard. You just call this guy. And and then I remember making the call and asking how much it was to bring a container from wherever to wherever. Yeah. And I remember, and this is when, mobile phones were not, I just remember dropping the phone because it was so inexpensive compared to how much we were being charged.
Wow.
So that was like whoa, we could do this ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So, then we slowly,
and did you have to get the growers to cut a side deal with you where
I think what you had to do is you had to begin discovering other producers that weren't working with a particular...
With a collective.
With an importer. But typically, let's say you're in Guatemala or Mexico and there's a producer that does good work that's known. There's another one across the dirt road, same elevation, same altitude, same.
That's not on the map. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you begin to talk to someone like that and figure out a way like, can we get some of this on a container, or can we consolidate, or there's a cooperative in Mexico that's got a bunch of small growers. So we began to like taste and build the coffees with the producers or with the growers cooperative and give them feedback and say, we'll reward you, we'll score these coffees and we'll reward you with better prices if they score higher. And then we'll build these specific lots so they can be delicious. And there was, a lot of mistrust at the beginning because historically they've been working with, exporters and that really didn't want them to know where the coffee was going.
Right.
Because they would,
predatory might be a strong word, but not.
It just was, right?
Yeah, it's just business.
So it was, and they were like, well, why wouldn't you just score them lower and pay us less? And we were like, no, we want them to be good.
Right.
And, so we wanted there to be good prices back to producers and reward them for good work, tell their story, and connect that piece to the customer. And then also, you asked about design, and then in 2007, the whole like single cup pour over, all that stuff was catching on too again.
Yeah.
So it got to be, we're like, well, we're gonna charge more for these coffees because we can tell their story, and it's not just everything's, it's not like walking into a wine bar, they're like, wine, it's all the same price. So we began to say, okay, there can be differentiations between countries and origins and regions and micro lots and producers and all of those things. So there was an elevation in what knowledge was available.
Yeah.
Whether the consumer still is caught up to that, hard to say.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we really, this whole thing that you hear, direct trade, was a term that we coined and modeled, and it caught on, and frankly, in many ways, it became the premise of transparency back to the producer is now kind of globally considered
across all industries, right?
So coffee was an interesting
pioneer
vehicle for it, because it's this,
I didn't know that.
It's this connective glue that we all drink, whatever. It starts our day and it makes us happy, and it's something everyone talks about, and like many people value a great cup of coffee. So
and are we talking Africa, South America, Central America?
Yes.
Any otose markets?
Those were, I think those are the biggest. We also, bought some coffee from the Pacific, Indonesia, those places. But I'd say primarily Africa, it ended up, I want to say 15 countries around the world. And we would go country by country and develop those relationships. So it was methodical,
Yeah.
place by place, and we try and discover somebody. And there was, there's something called Cup of Excellence, where these producers would submit their coffees, and they would go at auction, and that was also another great way to find these producers that would want to, not just sell 10 bags of their coffee, they'd want to sell a container. There was a discovery mechanism that way, and we participated very heavily in the beginning days of that as well. So.
We forgot a very important question. Why coffee? How did it all start?
Let's see. Well, I think that I like to say I had one real job out of college. I have a degree in history.
Yeah.
So I don't.
And were you ever a employed historian? I was reading about you, and I saw historian Doug Zell.
Just for a summer, I worked in the rare books room at the University of Wisconsin. So
technically, yes.
Yes,
the answer is yes.
Yeah, there was some cool stuff there, but I think that the world of academia, let's just say I've had some people I know that are in it, and it's its own thing, and I don't think it would have been for me. So, and then I thought I would be a lawyer, and I didn't do that well on the LSAT, so that crushed that dream.
Nipped it in the bud.
Yeah, that crushed that dream. So, or fortunately, so did well in corporate sales, but then started a bottled iced tea company in 1989.
Corporate sales in.
Here's a good one. When laptops were being introduced.
All right.
It's just play the old timey music. So it was when
that's an important product.
Yeah. So it was for a company called NEC, which is a big Japanese company.
Okay. Yeah.
So at that time it was like NEC and Compaq.
I feel like they made video games. NEC.
Then cash registers. There's the other
electronics.
One, electronics. Yeah. So they're a big company. So anyway, did that for like 10 months, and. Was good at it, but not for me. Ohio was my territory. So, was sitting at a bar across the street from where I lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I asked for a glass of iced tea, and they said they were out, and this was in 1988, may have been 89, and I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was fresh brewed iced tea in a bottle? And they're like, yeah,
crazy idea.
And so I called a buddy of mine who had moved out to Los Angeles. I'm like, oh, we should try this, figure out a way to do this. So we had so then we went out, we launched a bottled iced tea company that was stevia sweetened in 1989 because we wanted to do something different. And it was like a black tea and like a mint and a herbal berry, I remember, with a painted on label. And it was stevia sweetened, which at the time sounded like a great idea because it was a non-caloric sweetener. But it wasn't generally recognized as safe by the FDA. So then all of our inventory was seized, which is amazing, right?
By the FDA.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So then we reformulated it with juice, and it got cloudy and whatever. But we got into national distribution like natural food stores, which at the time Whole Foods was still ascending. So
yeah.
There was places called like Mrs. Gooch's in Los Angeles, and I can't remember the others.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but
Erewhon.
Yeah, whatever. We didn't. Yeah, the first iteration of Erewhon or whatever it was way back when.
East Coast.
Yeah. So it didn't. It went belly up after 4 years. So it didn't. It didn't work.
4 years is a run, though.
That's
not nothing.
Yeah, but it was like
learn a lot.
Run up credit card debt and cry to my parents or whatever it was. So anyway. So after that, I went to go work in coffee. We started the tea thing in Los Angeles, then moved it up to the Bay Area. Actually went to go work in coffee at Pete's Coffee in Northern California, who was eventually the acquirer of Intelligentsia. Yeah. Which is, whatever you want to say it is. Yeah. And then another roaster called Spinelli that's now defunct that somebody else bought and whatever. So. And the thought there was like, well, if I, control my own my own environment and have a cafe where we roast and we can serve the customers, then we have a much greater control over, what happens with the product. So that was the idea, and I think that.
Hence the roasting, right?
Yeah, hence the roasting and in-store experience and all that stuff. But then we backed into wholesale with Intelligentsia through a series of events with one of the kind of seminal farm to table, molecular gastronomy restaurants
Yeah.
at the time called Charlie Trotter's, which is now, but sort of one of the famous
Yeah.
of that ilk. And that, and one Whole Foods in Chicago, went and said, hey, they're like, well, yeah, we use local coffee, and it was all, this is in Chicago, it was like all from like Madison, Wisconsin. I'm like,
Right.
well, this is from Madison. It's
Right.
not that local. So anyway, so then they put us in one bulk bin, and that was, who knows? I want to say it was like, 1997, something
Right.
like that. So
well, one thing we've talked a little bit about La Colombe,
Yes.
which was a counterpart or
Yes.
competitor
Yes.
In Philly at the time, and the legend about La Colombe, which it sounds like is similar with you guys, is getting it into the restaurants, the tastemakers. So people are coming in saying, "Wow, I haven't had coffee like this anywhere else," and then is that one of the ways that word got out, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that you could, I'm sure a lot of coffee roasters, if you were to call 100 coffee roasters, they'd say putting it into restaurants on menus can be a good thing or a bad thing, because they're not
going to have the TLC.
The likelihood of brewing it well or making
Right.
it well, particularly like espresso drinks, it's not high.
Okay.
It's higher now because a culture has been built like
Around it.
that values a barista, and like you expect the coffee at a
high
restaurant
level.
to be
Yeah.
much better now than you used to.
Right.
So I think that's changed in the value of and also it used to be, they wouldn't want to serve good coffee because then you'd linger too long and they wouldn't turn the table.
Right.
I mean, I still remember that at a steakhouse that shall remain nameless in Chicago. I went and did a presentation. This was kind of in the early days
Yeah.
of wholesale, and I was like, "What'd you think?" They were like, "We loved it." And they're like, "Of course we can't buy it."
Not for us.
And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "This is the weirdest." I'm like, "Why don't you just serve bad?" Because then we won't turn the table. And I was like, "Well, why don't you serve bad steak then?" And then we
Yeah.
could turn the table really quickly.
Yeah.
And they didn't laugh. So anyway, I think that the restaurant piece is part of it. I think that, but it was showing up in Whole Foods first and other grocers like that as well. And then people didn't think grocery was where it should. I mean, there's a bunch of, conventional wisdom around
Yeah.
freshness of coffee and other things that some of it's myth and some of it's true. And, but I think it was a combination. It essentially taught me also that the brand in its entirety is important, right?
Yeah.
Each piece. So people will forgive
lifestyle.
Yeah, people
right?
people will forgive a cup of coffee that's not so great at a restaurant if they've had it at your cafe and they know it's great, or they brewed it at home and they know it's
Yeah.
great. So but I do think more people expect to have really good coffee with their meal now than ever before.
Yeah.
And I think there's a generation that, in many ways, particularly for like a breakfast or brunch, like if the coffee's not good, they're not going to go get breakfast or brunch there.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that's,
so on that topic, like it's my favorite time of the day is
Yes.
when I wake up, I have my espresso machine.
Right.
I make a latte usually.
Right.
And like that's the best for me, So it like literally, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole day.
Completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's do that. Pet the dogs, stare off into the distance, and have gratitude that life's pretty good.
It just and I'm gonna belabor the point. It's just one of my favorite foods.
Yeah.
Like period.
Yes.
It's one of the best tastes and feelings.
I still say that I dream about the coffee that I'm going to have tomorrow morning.
You said it.
When I go to bed.
All right. So great. I mean, thanks for telling us about.
I don't know if I answered the question.
Oh, who cares? We already forgot the question.
Apologies for rambling.
Not at all. So